Imagine a power so incredibly small, so fundamentally unremarkable, that it's practically invisible to the naked eye.
Right.
But yet, this tiny, unassuming force contains the structural blueprint to completely transform the world from the inside out.
Yeah, it operates as the ultimate hidden mechanism. I mean, it completely defies our conventional expectations of how power is supposed to, assert itself in human history.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because normally when we think of world-changing power, we picture it as loud, right?
Oh, absolutely.
We think of massive conquering armies, geopolitical shifts, sweeping elections, or like billion-dollar tech breakthroughs.
Loud and flashy.
Exactly. But today, we are taking a deep dive into a text that maps out a completely different, almost subversive kind of power. We're looking at a set of analytical sermon notes titled "The Kingdom of God is Like" by Pastor Terence Sobers.
Yeah, and these notes break down a series of ancient parables, primarily from Matthew chapter 13, right alongside some incredibly sweeping prophetic passages from the books of Isaiah and Daniel. And regardless of your personal background, these are arguably some of the most heavily analyzed metaphorical texts in human history. I mean, the concepts embedded in them have fundamentally shaped entire civilizations.
They really have. We want to uncover why the source calls it an instrument of change, how it operates in ways that run totally counter to our modern instincts about success, and what it actually looks like to be the seeker of truth in an otherwise chaotic world.
And it is just a phenomenal framework to dissect, largely because its origin story doesn't begin in a palace or a boardroom.
Right.
It begins in the dirt.
Which is such a brilliant contrast, because if you want to understand the grand, eternal scope of this kingdom, the source insists you first have to look at its microscopic origins.
Yeah.
We assume you, the listener, are likely familiar with the basic plots of these parables, so let's bypass the Sunday school summaries and dive straight into the analytical notes Pastor Sobers provides.
So he starts with two parables focusing on the paradox of power, right? The mustard seed and the leaven.
Right, the mustard seed. According to the text, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, the least of all seeds, that somehow grows into a massive tree providing refuge for the birds of the air.
And what's fascinating here is the historical and agricultural context the notes tap into. In a first-century agrarian society, a mustard plant wasn't viewed as a stately, majestic oak tree.
No?
No, it was often considered an invasive weed.
Wow, okay.
Right. It grows rapidly, it takes over the garden, and it cannot be easily controlled once it takes root. So describing a divine kingdom as a mustard seed is, well, it's a surprisingly subversive metaphor.
I mean, it implies a power that doesn't wait for institutional permission to expand.
Exactly.
But wait, if it's an uncontrollable weed, how does the analysis bridge that to it becoming a place of refuge? Because the notes explicitly say this tree provides spiritual refuge for the disenfranchised.
Yeah, families, the sick, the homeless.
Right. But weeds don't usually build communities.
Well, that is the core paradox of its power. The notes highlight that this expansion starts with an incredibly simple, nearly invisible action.
Like what?
Like a kind word to a neighbor, sharing a meal. Or just an internal shift in a single human heart.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that simple intent acts like the seed. It takes root internally first, but then it aggressively spreads communally, completely altering the social ecosystem around it until it, becomes a structural refuge.
Oh, so what does this all mean? When I look at the leaven parable, where a woman hides yeast in a massive batch of dough until the whole thing is leavened, I naturally think of compounding interest in finance.
Oh, totally.
Or maybe how a viral idea behaves on the internet. You have this tiny catalyst that, over time, completely overhauls the system. But let's apply this to you, the listener, right now. Think about your own career or your personal goals.
Yo, it's tough.
Our modern psychology demands instant, flashy validation. We want the overnight billion-dollar startup. We want the 30-day life hack.
Yeah, we want results yesterday.
Right. But leaven operates in total darkness. It is silent. It takes agonizingly long by modern standards.
Well, and it works by fundamentally altering the chemical composition of its environment.
Right.
Because the modern expectation of power is external coercion. Like, we expect a conquering force to arrive and dictate new rules from the top down.
Yeah.
But Pastor Sobers' notes emphasize that the kingdom transforms from within. Leaven doesn't sit on top of the dough and command it to rise.
No, it gets folded in.
Right, it gets folded into the mess of the flour and water, and it changes the molecular structure of the dough itself. The notes say this method of entry seems entirely insignificant, yet it yields a degree of societal change that totally belies its initial size.
It's basically an inside-out infiltration.
Precisely. It changes the internal intent before it ever changes the external reality.
Okay, but if leaven works quietly in the dark and a seed is buried under the dirt, how does a highly driven, ambitious person ever find it?
That's the big question.
Because ambitious people are out looking for neon signs and loud crumpets, right? Not quiet dough.
Yeah.
And the source actually addresses this psychological friction next in what we can call the economics of discovery. We get two different profiles of discovery.
The man who stumbles on the hidden treasure and the merchant looking for the pearl of great price.
Exactly.
And the psychology behind both discoveries is incredibly revealing. You have the man walking through a field. He isn't actively searching for anything profound.
Just a normal day.
Right. He's just going about his daily labor. He stumbles upon a hidden treasure, hides it, and the text specifically notes that, for joy, he goes and sells all he has to buy that field.
Which is objectively hilarious if you think about it from the outside.
Oh, yeah.
Like, picture this guy's neighbors. He's liquidating his entire life. He's draining his 401k, selling his house, selling his tools, just to buy a seemingly random, unremarkable patch of dirt.
They definitely think he's having a massive midlife crisis.
100%. But to him, it's just basic, undeniable math.
Right. And then you have the merchant. This is a professional appraiser.
Mm-hmm.
His entire livelihood is based on recognizing value that others might overlook. He is actively seeking the best pearls. And when he finds this one singular pearl of great price, he does the exact same thing as the first man.
Sells everything.
He liquidates his entire portfolio to acquire it.
But here's where I have to challenge the standard reading of this. In many traditions, these stories are framed purely around the concept of painful, devastating sacrifice. Like, look at what you must give up.
Right, the deprivation angle.
Exactly. But the source emphasizes that the man did this for joy. I mean, selling everything you own sounds terrifying, but Pastor Sober's notes frame this not as a story of painful sacrifice, but as the ultimate bargain.
It is the ultimate market arbitrage.
Yeah.
The notes are very clear on this. The kingdom warrants any sacrifice because the sacrifice is fundamentally viewed as a good trade.
So let's bring the listener into this.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever been blindsided by something so incredibly valuable? A relationship, a sudden clarity of purpose, a new way of seeing the world, that it rewired your entire set of priorities in an afternoon?
Just completely flips your worldview.
Yeah. Suddenly, the things you were stressing about yesterday just seem like cheap plastic.
Well, that is the exact psychological mechanism the notes are highlighting. The costly pearl, or the hidden treasure, represents salvation in its multitudinous aspects.
And Source defines those aspects pretty specifically, right?
Yeah, as exposure to profound joy, supreme well-being, wisdom, and ultimate purpose. When the merchant sells everything, he isn't mourning the loss of his lesser pearls.
No.
He has simply realized that his entire life's pursuit up to that point was just a shadow of this singular ultimate reality.
Okay, so this kingdom is the most valuable thing in existence. Naturally, human instinct dictates that if something is that valuable, it must be highly exclusive.
Right.
We expect velvet ropes, high entry fees, massive background checks, and like bouncers at the door. If it's the ultimate treasure, only the elite should get access.
Sure, that's how human systems work.
But the notes immediately pivot to the parable of the dragnet, which totally shatters that assumption.
The dragnet is the ultimate equalizer. The text describes a massive net cast into the sea that gathers some of every kind.
Of every kind.
Yeah, it is fundamentally, radically inclusive at its initiation. It pulls everything in.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, but also highly problematic from an organizational standpoint. I look at this dragnet and I instantly compare it to the unfiltered nature of the early internet.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Or like a massive unmoderated public square. The notes explicitly state that this inclusivity means genuine, nominal, and false Christians are all pulled into the net together.
Right, shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah, they're all swimming in the same space, exposed to the same leaven and the same teachings. But we all know what happens to unmoderated systems. They degrade.
Very quickly.
They turn toxic. So how does Pastor Sober's analysis explain a system surviving its own radical inclusivity without just turning into a toxic cesspool of bad actors?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we see that this mixed bag reality is an intentional, temporary feature, not a bug.
Interesting.
The notes emphasize that the kingdom is designed to be universally attractive when properly presented. It wants maximum exposure. But the genius of the system is how it handles the bad actors. It relies on delayed judicial sorting.
Delayed sorting. What does that mean?
Yes. So once the net is full and drawn to shore, the text says the good are gathered into vessels, but the bad are thrown away.
Right.
But crucially, the sorting is not done immediately, and it is not done by the fish currently swimming in the net.
Oh, right.
The text specifies this judicial separation happens at the end of the age and is conducted by angels.
See, that shifts the perspective entirely. That removes the burden of moderation from the people inside the net.
Exactly. The purpose of the dragnet period is universal exposure to the truth. Everyone gets access to the leaven.
So no bouncers at the door.
Right. But the kingdom remains judicious. It doesn't lower its ultimate standards. It simply delays the final judgment to allow maximum opportunity for that internal transformation to take place. The sorting at the end of the age is merely revealing the changed from the unchanged.
The change from the unchanged. Everyone was in the same net, everyone heard the same concepts, but only some allowed the leaven to actually alter their internal chemistry. Which brings us to a very urgent practical dilemma for the listener. If you are living your life right now inside this massive mixed bag dragnet, surrounded by both the genuine and the toxic, how are you supposed to navigate it?
Yeah, how do you process it all?
Right. How do you process the information? The source actually offers a specific role model for this, right? The instructed scribe.
Yes, found in verse 52. The householder who brings out of his treasure things new and old.
Right. And Pastor Sobers defines this instructed scribe as a teacher who possesses substantial knowledge, blending ancient, timeless truths with modern, current applications.
It treats knowledge not as mere trivia, but as a functional capacity for impact.
I sort of liken this to a master chef, or perhaps a brilliant archivist.
I like the master chef idea.
Yeah, think about your own life for a second. Are you someone who clings entirely to the way things have always been done? Or are you constantly throwing out the past to chase every new trend?
Right. We tend to swing to extremes.
Exactly. But a master chef doesn't throw out a 200-year-old foundational recipe just because it's old. They respect the timeless architecture of it.
Mm-hmm.
But they also don't just blindly replicate it for a modern audience. They marry those ancient techniques with fresh local ingredients or new cooking methods to nourish the people sitting in their restaurant today.
They're the ultimate synthesizers. They translate ancient value for a contemporary palate without diluting the original substance.
But let me push back on this quiet, scholarly scribe imagery, because it feels completely at odds with the final texts in our source material.
How so?
Well, the notes conclude by defining the ultimate eternal attributes of this kingdom, using passages from Isaiah 61 and Daniel chapter 2.
Right.
And Daniel describes a kingdom set up by the God of heaven that will break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. I mean, that sounds like tanks, explosions, and violent conquest. How does a quiet master chef scribe fit into a massive world-breaking empire?
Well, the conflict there is just because we have been conditioned by human history to define breaking in pieces purely through the lens of violent coercion.
Fair point.
Like Babylonian, Roman, or modern empires dominate by crushing bodies and suppressing dissent. But the notes synthesize the Daniel passage with Isaiah 61 to reveal the actual mechanism of this dominion.
What's the mechanism?
Isaiah says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon the speaker to preach good tidings to the poor, to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to those who are bound."
So it's healing and liberty as a weapon.
Exactly. It is entirely redemptive power. The notes state that the kingdom spreads and dominates through preaching, teaching, healing, comfort, and enlightenment.
Wow.
That is how it breaks in pieces the other kingdoms. It shatters empires of oppression by systematically setting their captives free.
Yeah.
It consumes kingdoms of despair by healing the brokenhearted. It doesn't dominate through fear. It dominates by fundamentally repairing the human condition.
That is a staggering paradigm shift. It means the ultimate treasure of the scribe isn't military strategy or political leverage.
No, not at all.
It's wisdom, character, and the capacity to heal.
And that is why, as the Psalm 145 reference in the notes points out, it is an everlasting dominion. Empires built on coercion always eventually collapse under their own weight.
Always.
But a kingdom built on the internal transformation of the human heart, on truth and ultimate healing, is remarkably resilient. I mean, it is indestructible.
So look at the incredible arc we've traced through Pastor Sober's notes today. We started with a kingdom that operates like an invasive weed or practically invisible sourdough starter working silently from the inside out.
Right.
We explored the psychology of discovery, realizing that this hidden power is so profoundly valuable that liquidating everything you own to get it isn't a sacrifice, it's the ultimate bargain.
The absolute best trade you could make.
Yep. Then we navigated the uncomfortable, radical inclusivity of the dragnet, learning to trust a future sorting rather than tearing each other apart today. And finally, we arrived at an eternal blueprint, a dominion that shatters oppressive empires not with violence, but by healing the brokenhearted and setting captives free, guided by those who can masterfully weave ancient truths into modern life.
It really provides a comprehensive and deeply challenging framework for a completely countercultural way of seeing power and purpose.
It really does. And it leaves you, the listener, right in the center of the frame. Whether you are actively hunting for truth right now, rigorously examining the world like the merchant looking for that perfect pearl, or whether you are just stumbling through your daily commute and suddenly trip over something profoundly valuable, these ancient texts are making a direct demand on your attention.
They absolutely are.
They are asking you to ruthlessly evaluate what you truly value and what you are willing to trade for ultimate joy and purpose.
And this raises an important question, something for you to mull over as you go about the rest of your day.
What's that?
Well, if this kingdom truly operates the way the leaven does, if it is mostly unseen, if it works entirely from within the deepest parts of the human heart, and if it moves at a pace that feels agonizingly slow by our hyper-caffeinated modern standards, are you completely missing the most profound structural changes happening right in front of you simply because you are too busy looking for loud, flashy events instead of the quiet leaven transforming the dough?